My name is Brian Meece, one of the mentors here with the Oneday program, serial entrepreneur, and I'm joined by Scott Moraes. Super excited. 5X founder, three exits. We got some chaos in here. We got some yoga in here. We got startups in here. I'm super excited to kick things off. And Scott reminded me he wanted to have, he wanted to turn up the dial on the chaos coming into this call. So we'll make sure that we'll do that over the course of our conversation together. I thought I would go ahead and just start with Espressly, Scott. And since that's a relatively recent venture of yours, serving cafe owners, I would love to hear a little bit about the starting point for that business, how you found that opportunity through maybe some customer discovery or some other frameworks. But would love to dig into Espressly and learn a little bit about how that venture got up and out.
Yeah, it's great. So, Espressly was not even the first pivot, but the second major pivot of another business. I think something like doing Oneday even earlier would have been great. Espressly started off as something called Food Squire, which was basically a Grubhub, Uber Eats model. So it was a marketplace model where we actually had our own drivers. We were partnering with restaurants and we were selling food to people through an online marketplace. And just we ended up, it wasn't that there wasn't a need when we first were starting that, but it was more that as we went on, we all of a sudden were up against all these major competitors that were spending literally billions of dollars to acquire customers, and whether they made money or not, it didn't matter. They were looking for market share, and so our timing was a little bit off. And in terms of like customer discovery, I remember one day going out deeper into the field myself. I wasn't really involved in the early stage sales of those things, but going down to Providence, Rhode Island, and talking to restaurants, and almost be trying to sign up new restaurants and to see from a customer discovery standpoint of if we could do that. And we were almost getting kicked out. And it's like, if you're getting kicked out of your customers, potential customers' restaurants, that maybe you're not really solving the right problem anymore. And the issue was that they already had like 7 different delivery services. These things started off by saying, hey, we can provide delivery for you, but this is now a couple years into it. And Grubhub's taking 30%, Uber Eats taking 30%, margins are being decimated by the restaurants. They're no longer really providing a real service. It's primarily just about gaining market share. So with that, we ultimately ended up pivoting and realizing eventually we didn't really want to be on the delivery side, but where we saw an interesting niche within restaurants was that Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks had these phenomenal online ordering apps. But a lot of other independent cafes, there was no way that they could actually have that same level of technology to be able to compete for online ordering. So particularly also during COVID, when all of a sudden they had to change their operations, to do a lot of curbside pickup, there was this pivot into being able to serve restaurants. So that came about, from really getting deep into that industry and effectively finding that there was this underserved need for cafes to be able to give them a really strong tech platform to be able to get their own mobile ordering capabilities.
So you kind of started off, like a lot of spaces that are kind of hyped up, competing with a bunch of, bigger dogs in the space, Grubhub, Uber Eats, et cetera, on the delivery side. But then you uncovered this need, which was and I remember using a lot of, because in Upper Manhattan, where I lived for over a decade, I would go to a lot of those cafes and I would use, maybe it was Espressly actually, because they had their own little reward system and pre-order system that was pretty slick. And I was like, oh, it's about time they got this. This is kind of cool. But what I want to dig in a little bit here on how did you find that problem in the midst of all the other ones? And as you're getting kicked out of of some of these restaurants by your potential clients, what were they saying to you on your way out the door that said, you know what? Not only am I on the wrong track, but here's a signal that I'm on the right track. How did you pivot into what Espressly ultimately became?
It's a great question. I mean, part of it actually came from my own. It was part of my own issue is that it was ironic that I had this online ordering and food delivery company, and I did not order delivery food very much. Like, it just wasn't something that I actually did. My family, we cook a lot. I often, what I really like to do, I love deals. So I love it if something is either, easier or on sale. And I didn't really like just like the food being marked up a ton, coming an hour later. And so part of it was like out of this, from frustration, out of the complexity of that model. And then just thinking about, it's like, what do I actually even personally like? I really like getting deals on, like, just going into a place and being able to buy something maybe at less cost than I might be buying it. And the other element is, at that time, there were some places where you had to stand in line for a lot of things, of which most annoyingly on the cafe front is that some people have a particular coffee that they like at a certain place. They want it done a certain way. And what we ended up being able to, creating based on our own desire at first was this idea that, like, well, why not just make it extremely easy for someone just in like one click to be able to reorder their favorite drink someplace and then be able to skip the line and be able to go there. So it was sort of an idea as we were just spending so much time in the space. But then as we uncovered and got closer with a lot of cafe owners, they also were like, yeah, this would be great. Like, they were having a lot of problems because there was a lot of congestion to their lines. They knew there were some people that really just wanted a drink, but if they were serving other breakfast items, things like that, there might be 25 people in the line, and were losing customers who didn't want to wait in that line just to go get their drink. So we, in speaking with a lot of them, we ended up providing them with this really great ability to have some people be able to just effortlessly get what they want really quickly.
Well, I love that you like a good deal and that you don't eat out a lot. I knew we were kindred spirits, Scott. I like the cut of your jib because I'm the same way. I like a good deal and I don't eat out of too much. Well, I'm going to dig in here a little more then on this, these cafe owners, because you said basically you had a hunch. You kind of were getting yelled out of the building for your other idea, and you had a hunch that was around waiting in line less, building up an incentive loyalty program, getting a deal potentially there. Then you said you talked to lots of cafe owners. And when uncovering the problem that they had, what was that aha moment where you're like, you know what, this hunch that I had, this thing that I felt like it was in my gut, like telling me that there was an idea here. I'm starting to see some inkling that this could work. Walk me through that aha moment. And then who was your first customer?
I guess I have to admit that the aha moment that it could work is just, I have a very vivid imagination, and I could literally just see what this would look like. I was just observing the problem. Like, you'd go to these cafes and there was just like, you would have to stand in line for, like, there'd be 25 people in front of you. And there was a way to be able to send these orders to them so that someone back there could just be making your simple order and putting it to the side. And some businesses were already doing this effectively for their, like, Grubhub and Uber Eats orders. So, like, some of them even had like designated places where pickup orders could come, but a lot of those pickup orders were not happening through customers. They're being picked up by DoorDash drivers and Grab. So it's like, well, why not just make it really easy for people to be able to go to their favorite place instead of going to an aggregated marketplace like DoorDash, and then each time having to go through your whole order again. Why not just, if somebody loves their particular coffee shop, this was another assumption we had, that people are frequently buying coffee from the same places. So if you're buying coffee from the same place, all of a sudden it makes sense where you could have a centralized app just for that particular service, and it could be branded for them. So another issue some places really didn't like about the marketplaces is that they knew that, like, if somebody buys a sandwich from you one day, that Grubhub will be sending offers to that customer to go to other places, because Grubhub really views it as their customer, not yours. But by giving people their own, white label apps, and eventually the technology we created was that we could give people their own white label app within 4 hours. So that was like a big thing. We were like trying to really, really rapidly get this stuff out. We thought those were all major values, but getting a first customer is still hard, because getting a first customer before, especially as a technology company, if you're unproven and you haven't actually built in, like, the entire flow of what you're like what you're seeing.
Now we're back to the chaos side of the chaos to success.
Yeah, total chaos. It's absolute chaos when when you're trying you've got a general idea of what you want something to be like, but the intricacies of what eventual features you're going to have, things like that, it's like you don't see that. You can't always see the entire flow of what the ordering experience is going to be like. So I think we ultimately got lucky. I mean, I started basically reaching out to tons of different people in any connection that I had, either cafes that I knew. And the ultimate customer that we ended up getting first, we got through an investor who actually passed on our round, but he had been an investor in another, like a small bagel chain. And he ended up connecting me to the owner of that chain, of whom I had to put on the like enterprise sales hat, which to me is, taking lots of rejection and not saying no necessarily, keep going back to people, even if they're saying no, not right now. And I eventually, like, after 3 weeks of trying to woo one guy, he eventually said, all right, you know what? I think we actually do need this. And this could be really cool. Where we got really lucky with him that I
want to jump in there, Scott, because that doesn't sound like luck to me, right? So you said you were at, jumping in there, getting meetings, taking rejection, iterating based on the feedback for the meetings, going back to the same people. Whenever you said, hey, I got lucky, I waltzed in the door and they signed up their first 500 stores, that to me sounds a little bit more like I got lucky. So
Yeah.
to say, opening up the story with, hey, I got lucky, I had to go through and slog it out and finally get my first yes, which, I'd say that you worked for that luck, at least at this story thus far.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I think where we got lucky with this particular customer was, and I think this is something that I now I love to impart this idea to people. If it's possible, if you're building a product that's going to have a lot of different features, the best first customer you can get, I think, is someone where you can pitch them not on the perfection of what you're offering, but the idea that they are going to be almost like your co-development partner. And so with taking that mindset on, they can be much more forgiving in the process of actually trying to build the product for them. So we got to work with this guy, and he ended up where we're lucky is that he was someone who naturally saw the forest for the trees. So he wasn't like overly nitpicky on like if something went wrong with a certain order. There's all kinds of problems with like order transmission, stuff like that. He was just super cool about that, so that we could develop the product better. Our second customer actually was ideal because she was much more of a hawk. So she was like on us about anything that was like, oh, this had an extra, this had an extra T in it, and she would be like, she was really on it. But that helped us refine. But if we switched the order of these things, we would have been screwed. If we had someone who was all about the trees, it could have been a disaster. So that we got really lucky about that. And I like to try to bring that up for other founders who might be building something that's really feature rich, is, try if possible to get to work with a forest for the trees kind of customer who can really help you develop that initial phase, because all these things are going to be iterative, and you're going to then have to bring it out to the market again, and it's going to keep getting beaten up until you refine it to a good place. And you want those customers to be working with you. You can't just do this stuff in-house. You can't just build it and then put it out there. It's going to have to be like a living, breathing thing.
I love that. So I do get the luck part where it was the 1-2 punch of the forest for the trees and then the hawk swooping in. So that part, I do think the timing worked really well. But I love the idea of kind of a pilot partner and somebody who's going to be a proper thought partner with you as you develop your product, and they're kind of just in it. I remember when we were building GreenlightGO, similar dynamics. There were some folks that we had in our steering group, owned, really fantastic film, television, media production facilities out of New York. And they were just down to jam. They just loved kind of the problem space that we were working on, trying to, optimize facilities, make it easier for teams in the production world to procure these facilities and services. And they were, really, really excited to give feedback and be part of that. So I think sometimes if you have a cool idea and they can see that you're really about helping solve some big problems and help their businesses, they can really be fantastic thought partners and pilot partners as you build and go. Very, very cool. So you talked about your first customer, talk about your second customer. So how'd you go from there to a successful, how'd you go from 2 customers to ultimately where you landed as a successful exit and helping lots and lots of cafe
You know,
owners.
like this is something also I thought it could make a good point. You know, so this is obviously really it was B2B to C. I mean, so ultimately we're building something for businesses of which they were going to leverage to then get out there to their ultimate customers. And you know, I'm a big believer that like if you have a consumer product or something like that, and you're going D2C, you can use a lot of like basically like marketing, advertising, things like that to sometimes to get early stage customers. But when you're doing something that's enterprise sales, really, where it's highly integral to the core of someone's business, I view it really, it's much more of a sales function to me than a marketing function. And on a sales function, the key to me is you have to just be super creative of how you're actually going to get in front of these people. So like one thing that I even personally did is I joined a Facebook group called Coffee Business Owners. And so although I'm not a coffee business owner, and what I knew I couldn't just like promote our stuff out there, but what I started doing is like, you know, engaging with all different kinds of people's posts, things like that. And started up conversations. Anytime conversations went to online ordering, I would then be able to plug us a little bit. And then I started noticing some of the key people in the group who were like highly influential. And I realized that those are the ones I wanted to become our evangelists, because they were the outspoken ones in that larger group of our exact target customers. So I then basically would side sell to those people, and I gave some of them incredible deals that they just basically couldn't pass up. So like we made it sort of the business model with them is that they took zero financial risk whatsoever to start using our technology. Like we got it for those ones. We had no onboarding setup, no cost. Only thing that would happen is they could use our app, and if people bought things on it, we would get a small percentage of it. And so they were like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And because of that, and because we treated them so well, they did become evangelists for us within that Coffee Business Owners group, which ended up just over time getting us tons of different customers. So those are a lot of like the smaller ones. But that was just like a good way of like leveraging pre-existing, I call it aggregated groups of customers. Otherwise, we actually just started selling like long tail selling to like larger franchise groups, like where we, you know, like the one we got, you know, ended up having like, you know, 55 locations, that kind of stuff. And those are, again, like those are big enterprise sales, because this is like so important to them. They, you know, they do not want you to screw up their technology and harm all their customers.
Sure. No, I love that. So one of the takeaways there is this idea of getting clients that are high social capital clients, right? They're the folks that have high trust, high reputation. They're loud. Other folks know them. Other folks follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get them on board, then it gets easier to get some of the longer tail, which you did more of a classic sales approach, it sounds like, to get those folks on board. But now you've got critical mass. You've got, you've got your first followers. You got those first dancers on the dance floor, so to speak, and they're dancing nicely. They're looking good. Other folks are like, I want to dance out here too. Look at them. They're out here. Let's go. So I love that. Well, I know we've got some folks that are also joining us here, via Zoom. And if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat, and we can zing Scott as appropriate with additional questions in addition to what I've got here. I'm happy to pass along any questions and make sure we leverage Scott here as best that we can as we're building our own businesses and ideas. And so ultimately, you chose to kind of exit Espressly. How did you know it was time? Well, wait a second. I want to back that up. That's a teaser. We're going to come back to that question. But how did you fund this business?
It was a mix of bootstrapping, which is kind of done out of necessity for something like this, but not always a very good idea, particularly for complex build technology businesses. And then we did end up having in raising angel investment. We did 2 different rounds, and
so from a bootstrapping perspective, can you give a range of as best as you can, and what you were generating revenue wise, but before you got to an angel investment? I'm going to assume that you had some revenue traction ahead of getting your angel funding. Is that assumption correct?
Yeah. I mean, we had it's kind of like low 7-figure revenue. But we actually raised money. The timing of some of this of why and where a lot of chaos ensued is, again, we went through multiple pivots before we actually ended up getting into this idea. So one of the other things that we did for bootstrapping is my co-founder had a quite really good idea into selling gift cards through a series of hospitals, and that actually ended up raising a ton of money that then we were able to basically use as a float and be able to get a lot of development elements pushed forwards. So we were
Wait a
basically.
second. So whenever you say sell gift cards, was that pre-sales? Is that like, what is that? What does that mean? Like, that you're selling
Yeah,
gift cards?
that wasn't, so that was actually, that was in the earlier business model. That was something that generated, for online food ordering and delivery.
Copy.
Yeah, so that worked. That was one of the bootstrapping methods of sort of a creative way of getting, like, about 500 grand of cash into the company early on. So those opportunities are sometimes out there where it's not your core business, but if you're bootstrapping, sometimes it can be worthwhile to go away from your core business. If you happen to be, I think if you're really going like a venture route, then, I had one more mentor in my life. He says not all revenue is revenue. Meaning, like, that revenue to us that's not actually revenue for the business. I mean, it's good money for us to bring in, but it wasn't like an indication of actual traction, because it's not necessarily a repeatable element. So, but to me, if you're bootstrapping, then screw it. I mean, like, money's money. So, like, if money
Yes.
helps you, it's great. If it's like a VC thing, then, like, yeah, you got to be careful not to be like spreading your focus out too much. But yeah, so that's
I
a bit
love
of that.
that. And I'm thinking about, so many parallels. RocketHub was a super angel funded entity, but we were competing with venture backed entities. And so one of the things that we found was a carve out where we would do crowdfunding, and we would do virtual currencies for major brands, which were like, chunky 6-figure projects, and no one else wanted to bother with them because, that wasn't part of their scalable model. We were taking those things all day long, and they were actually really meaningful in aggregate. And they became a big piece of our a B2B business. We ended up powering the Dodge Dart registry, where we could like crowd fund a car. We did work with White and Kennedy and the Chrysler Group, and we did all sorts of really cool projects because nobody else really wanted to. And we were big enough to have those opportunities and leverage that brand to leverage our brand to find those opportunities. So that's super cool that you know not all revenue is revenue if you're venture, but if you're bootstrapped, I think money's money. And if that extends your runway and broadens your opportunities, and it's solving a problem for a customer, it sounds like a win.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be careful that you don't spread yourself out too thin and end up screwing your runway because you're like pursuing the wrong things. But yeah, exactly. If you don't know, basically, if you didn't, we were like, would not allow our business to die, and we didn't want to be in a place that we were so dependent on financing that, like, if we couldn't hit like a next funding milestone or role, then we were just gonna have to like fold up and walk away. We're like, no, like we eventually, like, one day we're just like we're effing cowboys. Like, we're gonna make money. Like, we're going to do this. We are not going to let this die. Whatever that means, we're going to make sure that we have enough money to pay for all we had like 30 employees. They were all overseas, but it's, still is like head count of 30 people. And like, so we had money that was going out the door. Like, we have to make sure to make this work. And we want to we don't want our destiny in anyone else's hands.
Yeah, awesome. Love that. Now let's switch gears to it, because since you've done so many different ventures, and I thought Espressly was a great study, and just finding that scale, and just such an impressive venture. Let's switch it up over to frameworks. So
Framework, yeah.
the framework, the whole co-working space, which co-working is actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's we started my first company, RocketHub, started out of a co-working company, and the group that ended up acquiring us, we actually met them at the water cooler, literally at the water cooler, a few years before they ended up acquiring us. So just because we bumped into them, they were also in the co-working space. So, there's a lot of happy accidents and luck that could come when you get a lot of people all together, literally in the same room. So I've always been really enamored with this, co-working concept. Talk about framework. You know, when did you come into the market? What was the concept? How did you get into this? It's a fairly capital intensive game, and you were able to find profitability with your model pretty quickly. Tell me how you kind of got into this venture.
Well, so in terms of like leveraging luck and things like that, basically I had found out that an extremely wealthy and supposedly very wise venture capitalist had kind of moved back to the area that I was in, the Berkshires, to prompt a bunch of economic development initiatives. And this guy, he started and ran like 3 different VC funds that are still around now. And he's one of the main people that spread telecommunications, wireless networks through the US, through Russia, and through China. So he's, I don't know if exactly a billionaire, but he's at least got personally, probably 800 million to over $1 billion. And he was creating this fund effectively to help things in this area. And I was like, well, I'm an entrepreneur in this area. Like, maybe I should try to start working with that guy somehow. And so I thought about different ideas that might be interesting to him and his like newly formed group. And one of them was a co-working space, just because of the element of incubation of different ideas, bringing people together. And so that was sort of the birth of that. And they thought it was a great idea. So I just kind of got to work, not for them, but with them. So we just kind of structured it as partners and started building that out. And then, yeah, like we ended up hitting all kinds of problems. So like one of them was that we thought we were a shoo-in for, like, again, they had so much money, but just for structuring this for the way, like where debts were going to be repaid, things like that. We thought we were a shoo-in for this economic co-working development grant. But when they found out basically how much money my partner had, he wasn't like physically, involved in all of it. He had a CEO who I was working with, who was a great guy. But when the grants found out like basically how much money like they had behind them, they were like, they would no longer give us the grant. It was like, damn it, that was like 75 grand that we had like towards our build out. And so because of that, with a mixture of like contractors, for instance, like also wanting a lot more to build out the space than what we wanted, we're like, okay, screw it. Again, it was kind of that little bit of that cowboy mentality where it's kind of a little like, well, screw it, I guess we'll just GC it ourselves. So like we can save tons of money. And so it kind of like through my my partner, the CEO of this new VC entity, which is now a big VC thing in the Berkshires. We decided like we'll just do it ourselves. So we like kind of put that together. And we also, in terms of further problems that we had in relation to something like Oneday, one big lesson that I now impart to all kind of founders that I speak with is, so we made the mistake early on of, we did a lot of surveying. And so we created these really nice surveys about like basically effectively like, do you like, I forget the questions. It's basically like, do you like this? Do you like, is this something great for the area? And we got a tremendously positive response to that. And of course, though, a tremendous positive response that does not necessarily, we'd do events, we'd have tons of turnout, but those don't necessarily end up becoming your customers. So like, as we were about to launch and we were trying to pre-sell, we realized that all of a sudden, like we had to cut our like daily desk prices down. And we were not looking like we were going to fill up any of the office spaces that we had. We had some, but not all of them. And so again, that situation turned into a like, oh, holy shit, like, okay, well, I guess it's time for me to sell again. So like I don't want to lose money. I want to make money with this. So we I went out and we started networking through various sources. And by the time we opened, we had rented out all of the offices and we had a ton of people. So we actually, within our model, we opened and were profitable in the first month.
So how'd you find the customers? So how'd you go from like surveys that were giving you false signals? And anybody that knows me or has been on any of my squads, they know how I feel about surveys. Very difficult to do right. And in the early stages, don't give us the signals that we need. Even if you have one that's jumping off, you're like, wow, here we go. Nah, probably not.
I love that you agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
it's
I
an,
absolutely agree with it. I'm doubling down on that. So
me too.
surveys are,
Yeah.
yeah, are very tricky to do for with small groups. So how did you go from, all right, your trajectory is a bit off because we did some exploration, but it wasn't quite right. To, all right, now we're going to hustle and get up there and sell with co-working, you have kind of a couple of major revenue streams. One is the individual office, which are generally long term, sometimes still month to month, but you can give them a license, longer term license, 6, 12, 18 months, 24 months, what have you. Then you have your subscription model of the actual desks. And
Yep.
usually the financial mechanics, at least from what I understand, is that the offices kind of are the anchor, from a revenue perspective, and then you got your gravy with the monthly desks. You have your events and your other different sponsors that might come in and do some different things with the place. But tell me a little bit about how you went from we could be over our skis on this to we filled it up. I mean, obviously something
Yep.
changed in those 3 or 4 months. What changed?
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Well, I guess it went first to the sort of analytical, creative drawing board of thinking about sort of who are your customers, and then who are your potential customers, and where are your potential customers. So when it came to on the office spaces, it started thinking literally about what are some, for instance, some kind of small businesses that might want like downtown presence that don't have it necessarily right now, and where are the people that could benefit from that. So as we thought more about that, then we were able to kind of narrow down a list to something, I forget how many it was exactly, could have been 40, 60 companies, something like that, to start. And just even as a starting place, and then we started thinking about personal relationships we might have with some people that might be in and around these things. And so a lot of the early stage people that we ended up selling to were people that we already knew in some capacity. And so the sale became more about looking at what they were currently doing, and ultimately about what benefits they might be able to have envisioning themselves being in this space. So it was thinking through some of those elements for someone. And so we ended up getting, like a lot of people with like, for instance, real estate offices that could benefit because the most popular coffee place in the area was right across the street. So things along those lines, like they wanted to have that exposure and they didn't have it in their other locations. So it became like the real estate firms became easy targets to become customers for us because they wanted that exposure. It was almost like part of a marketing budget for them to be able to be in a space like this where they could meet a client for coffee and then go back and sign contracts right across the street. So like that ended up being like a target markets, like a segment that I still frequently think about all kinds of businesses, like who really is like a segment of customer who might really make sense for what this is already about. Like it was co-working, so we weren't going to pivot away from that again. Like we already had it, so we already had our supply. Now we had to go figure out where could there be some demand for this, of which people are maybe not even connecting the dots.
Well, I love what you said about the big thesis to test was like they wanted a presence downtown. They wanted to have a footprint in a specific area. I think about even when I was at Citi Ventures, we had in the London office, for example, Citi was at Canary Wharf, but we had like our own kind of co-working WeWork style space that was like in the a little more central and a little more accessible and a little more hip on the innovative side. So in terms of the look, the feel, the location, the neighborhood, all that. So having an understanding of that market's needs, pain points might have been helpful before you built it. Did you ever think about that
Yeah.
that part of
Oh
it?
yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, I think I'm a classic example of which I now could say like that something like the One-Day curriculum I think is wonderful to go through a lot of customer discovery elements before, and really in demand validation elements before you end up just like having an idea and building it and selling it. Like when you have like I grew up in an arts colony with a lot of artists. My one reason I am an entrepreneur is like my father-in-law growing up was an artist, and he ended up building a multi-million-dollar company from his artwork, from these photographs that he turned into cards. And so I always grew up with someone just sort of that more idea, like from the Steve Jobs perspective, of sort of like we will make it and they will want it. But like the reality is like that only works like a small amount of the time, and it's a tremendously it opens you up to tremendous random results. Because if you're just off by a feature set or you're off by some market dynamic, you're missing something where if you had gone earlier on and validated more things first, it's generally a better way to go about it. However, as you know, as a musician and as an artist, sometimes the artist just doesn't really give a shit about that, and the artist just wants to make their artwork and see what happens.
That's right. That's I spent the first decade of my career, if you would call it that, touring indie bands, making indie movies, and I would probably fall into that camp. So, but luckily, I was able to pivot into RocketHub, and then the trajectory was a lot more, was a lot more exciting. You're just creating something that people wanted, and it was awesome. And I got to leverage all my creative friends to join me in that process because they were the ones using the site. So I was getting feedback whether I wanted it or not. They were telling me what they thought of things. So, well, that's very cool. Well, ultimately, both Espressly and Frameworks, had their exit stories. And so how big were these whenever you exited them as a founder? And what was that like after being, with both of these ventures for years, right? Building this literally something from nothing, and then handing them the proverbial keys, somebody who acquires this, handing them proverbial keys and saying, all right, it's yours now.
Yeah, I mean, well, with something like Framework, the exit was more around some element of positioned luck. Because sort of like as you mentioned about you got someone like at the water cooler that ended up acquiring. The acquisition here was that people wanted to do a lot more with the entire building in real estate. So the value of what we were doing was of higher value to someone to be able to buy everything out. And so that it just ended up being like an attractive way of exiting that. But it wasn't by any means like my most successful thing, but it was like a positive thing. But it was the feeling of it, though. I mean, the feeling of building something and selling it. I think it has a lot of mixed emotions. I would say, like it's like my first business that I built was multiple yoga studios and Pilates stuff and massage stuff, and total mixed emotions on that, because like I was able to exit. That actually was a really good exit, but it's still sad a little bit sometimes. Like I actually went by the first yoga studio that I created, and it was sold again, and then it's still doing well. So it's like alive. It's awesome to see your baby is still alive, your initial location. But now they're changing locations and they're moving to like a bigger space, same name and everything. And I'm just kind of sad about it. Like I saw it the other day, it's like, it's really nice when what you create is able to live on in the world and grow. It really feels kind of like to me, like a parental aspect. It's like, it really is kind of like a child. It's like this stumbling little kid, and you get it to a place where it finally can walk on its own. Then someone else goes away to college, and then all of a sudden, like these
different steps and stages. I'm curious as what the name of that studio was, and also you said something here I wanted to unpack. You like it wasn't my most successful exit, because that's an interesting word, success, and what that means. But it sounds like from the follow-up thought there with the Pilates and the studio ventures, would that be considered? Would you consider that your most successful exit? And then how does that play into some of the bittersweetness that you're feeling? And yeah, feel free to let me know what the name of that. Samantha was asking here in the chat.
It's called, that was Radiance Yoga, but then we had some other businesses that were just under the same umbrella, but didn't function the same way. I mean, I think that a lot of these kind of businesses were all tied to real estate, and they got me into commercial real estate. And so a lot of the sort of more like better, higher value sort of financial things all involved real estate and real estate transactions. So not the same. The business would be sold, but then it was like adjoining real estate and things like that sort of bumped the value of things up a lot. But I guess in terms of, sorry, just going back to your question being like the emotions of these various things. Yeah, I'm intrigued actually. In Oneday, I was wondering if there could be sometime a later module just for people to sort of learn some of the even mechanics of selling a business. So like, what does that actually look like? And there's even interesting elements of like, what are you selling when you sell a business? Are you selling, depending on how it's structured, things along those lines, that can look a lot of different ways. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. No, it's a fascinating topic, and I've also exited a business, and it's wild. It's a wild experience just to no longer even have the email. For me, what hit me hard was I was no longer Brian at RocketHub anymore. I had to like have it like, use another Gmail or something. I was like, oh, this is weird.
Yeah.
All these other little things that your identity is tied up in.
Identity and time too, right? And time and a lot of founders that I've known sell something, and I think one of the reasons why some even who have like wildly successful exits, like of my friend John sold his healthcare consulting company for $800 million. He had 67% of the equity, and within like 6 months he was starting something else. So like, clearly he doesn't need to do that. But he does need to do it psychologically, because he was running such a big organization. He had so much invested in it that like being free and just like free to walk around the city of DC, or like go to movies, or like go to restaurants, bars, go to Europe. Like, yeah, you go to Europe, but then eventually he's getting bored because the level of engagement that he had was so high that I think that's one of the things that draws founders to go back to something, even if they could theoretically retire. Like you're energetically just not, you need that element. If you have like a team of 30 people or more or something like that, it was a lot for me, like leaving Espressly with 30 people. It was all mostly on Slack, but similar. It's actually nice being back in Oneday that there's like all this big Slack thing, because I was so used to like just being in this community. Granted, they were all my employees versus being part of a team, but yeah, I think that's just another interesting element of it, right? Like that level of engagement. It's strange to sell something and then to no longer actually have any obligation to work on it again.
Well, I think that's opening up I mean, ultimately we're put on this planet, at least my perspective, is to help each other and build things, and build things, help each other. And I think that you don't have fulfillment if you're just not doing anything, and I don't ever really want to retire. That's my point of view, but I could totally relate to your founder friend that, well, maybe not the 800 million exit part, but I could relate to, letting go of one thing and wanting to build another. I could definitely relate to that. So we got, you've sold, Radiance Yoga brand, success, framework success, Espressly success. But I was very curious about because your venture started with this kind of yoga Pilates world, and Samantha is part of the Oneday team, also in that yoga, a big fan of yoga. And we were all talking right before the show launched here about just welcome your takes. What are some of those bridges between like the world of yoga and entrepreneurship? Like, what's is there any philosophy that would work for both? Is there any, when it comes to sales, for example, or marketing or mindset, like what are the bridges there between them? Because they seem on paper like very different worlds, are they?
I think that they're different worlds, and also there's certainly either similarities and or definitely things from a yoga practice that can be really helpful. And granted, I used to practice asana, spent multiple thousands of hours on yoga mats, but lately it's with 2 little kids and really no real excuse, just haven't been to spend more eating and drinking rather than practicing yoga. But I would back up for a moment to say that I think that there's a general understanding of yoga that in modern society, which primarily really just means asana practice, which is really like, going to yoga classes, people primarily doing postures, which is sort of physical exercise, and physical exercise that's based a lot on lengthening and stretching, things like that. But that's really only like one of the 8 limbs of yoga as a whole practice itself. And it was the one that was created for just sort of making the body somewhat healthy, but also freeing the body up to be able to more comfortably meditate for longer periods of time. And where I think that the similarities of yoga are, or what could be beneficial in yoga for entrepreneurship, um, to me, it's not about the sort of flexibility analogy even. It's more around, like, so there's one really major benefit to I think any kind of continuous practice of anything, any art, but a continuous practice of something like yoga asana, where you show up in an ideal situation, you show up sort of regardless of what's going on. So if things are really great in your life, you show up. And if things are mediocre, you show up. And if things are bad, you still show up. And I think that that's where it's really, that's at least one really important concept in entrepreneurship, because, I think a lot of people even in one day, like, okay, like, well, if you're starting off and you're doing good customer discovery, you're validating these things, like, it sort of makes it seem like entrepreneurship might be somewhat of like a linear, like uptrending path. Like, if you do this, then like this good thing will happen. If you this other good thing will happen. But in I think not every business, but most businesses, at some point something will go wrong, and it could be a loss of a key customer. It could be the stress of an investment round. It could be an investment falling apart when you need the money. It could be lawsuits. It could be all kinds of key employees leaving, all kinds of things. And where I believe something like a yoga practice can be both helpful and a good analogy is in constantly practicing to bring your mind sort of back into effectively like a listening state, where your focus is softening, and you're literally practicing calming yourself down into just being present with whatever is real. And because in entrepreneurship, we can get flighty, things can happen, we can get very caught up in the problems that come to us. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, that creates so much anxiety that they might leave, or they might quit, or they might not be able to execute what they need to do. So yoga can, I think, especially on the meditative front, really help people out with that. And as well as, again, doing it itself, to me, is like entrepreneurship is its own practice. To me, I view it like it's a lifelong thing for us as entrepreneurs. So it's like, it's not just like one, like a hit and quit. It's like you're going to probably keep doing it forever. And with that, like, we hope to keep improving our own internal abilities to be skillful with it, and also to deal with things as they arise.
Wow, that was incredible. Samantha said, "So well said," and I agree with that. That was really nice, really nice framework. We got a question. We got some questions here. We got a few minutes left for the top of the hour. Teresa has got a question. If anybody else has questions, please drop them in the chat. In the meantime, we're going to put up shortly a QR code with some quiz questions to see how well y'all have been paying attention here. And we'll reveal those answers at the end of the show here. But Teresa says, how often did you do customer discoveries, and did you do it for each business, Scott?
Teresa, I would say the answer is not enough. I love the framework in Oneday of how there's so many different stages to customer discovery. I had read books, I'd read the lean startup, things like that, but I don't think that it really did enough, and that made us ultimately go slower. Like, I think there's an irony, in a sense, that feels like that customer discovery could be this exhaustive, long process. But the hope and idea is that it's helping you refine earlier on, so that you can actually push forwards faster when you actually really lock onto exactly what problem you're solving, for who, and what they're willing to pay for it, what feature sets, what other elements that you need, what messaging can you create that connects to that customer set, so that you have just a higher chance of success. And like, great story, quick, about like when I first launched my first yoga studio, I got this great advice from a mentor of mine who actually was a billionaire real estate guy. And he told me, he says, open slowly. And he says, don't promote yourself, just start small. And of course, I didn't listen to him. And so instead, I did the exact opposite. We promoted like crazy. We told everybody about it. First class we had, we were overpacked. The room was way too hot. It was a hot yoga studio, but we had dry heat. It was the wrong thing. And then my partner, who was going to lead that class, she hadn't even been in the flow of teaching a lot in the space, so she kind of choked up, taught a mediocre class, and we got all these terrible reviews. And it was sort of like, and it's of course in retrospect, even the early stage customer discovery wasn't just about like asking people, do they want a yoga studio or something? But that early stage customer discovery in relationship to our product and service, even when we launched, this guy, Stephen Musk, was so right. Like we should have actually just started, not even told anyone really about the class, had like a couple people come in, and we would have saw like how it went. And we would have then been able to iterate, and it ended up being fine. We fixed it, but we had these funny situations where we had some, we had to win people back. It was just a waste of time for us to try to go too big too fast.
Yeah, no, that's great. Start slow and then work your way up there. That's great. And I love how honest you were about that. We got some more questions popping in here. So, and also it's quiz time. So feel free to pull out your phones, scan the QR code, see how you do on this quiz. Let's take a look at this follow-up from Teresa. Thoughts on broadly launching like Dropbox versus niching down?
Thoughts on broadly launching like Dropbox versus niche? You mean Dropbox being just like a great service for all different kinds of people to be able
I'm going to assume that that's what she means there. Yep. Yep. And we're correct. She says yes.
I mean, for me personally, I would think if someone had already like, again, brilliantly mapped out the technical requirements for the initial infrastructure architecture, I think the niching, what you'd want to do is you'd still might be creating that, but then they'd be niching down to look at who are the most likely early customers for something like Dropbox. So are you, for instance, Dropbox, are you talking about individuals like myself, or small businesses, or is this enterprise level software? Each one of those is going to be a different sale, and it's going to be a different messaging and marketing strategy. And so I think you can somewhat do both, even if the service was the same. But to me, I like the idea of trying to niche down, even if you have something like that. So it's, the answer to me is sort of like yes, instead of either or.
That's helpful. We got a couple more questions. See if we can fit them in here. If you were building a marketplace to rival Etsy, where would you focus your attention for customer interviews? Facebook, forums, paid ads, landing pages, etc. Any tips for Gavin as he's building his marketplace to rival Etsy?
I mean, I believe from the story of Etsy, when they launched themselves, they were going to where their customers were. I think they were going to crafts fairs, and so they were getting out there and talking to people who were actively buying things. But for right now, like that's no longer exactly the case, because now Etsy does exist. So I think your customers that you'd be looking for are people who might, for instance, already be shopping in these kind of ways, and trying to identify what problems they're experiencing. Are they experiencing problems with Etsy? Is there some way of which you're differentiating? I don't know exactly what you're doing, but if you're differentiating from Etsy, maybe it's a niche down version or something like that, I would be thinking about trying to find those customers. Like, again, where are they? They are, in terms of your question, they're online, but they're also physically places. Every person is both online and physically somewhere.
I love that. I love that. I love that. If you can, I feel like in real life is it's almost like this pattern disruptor, because it's so, we're so used to just being on the computers and kind of post-pandemic, that if folks get out of the building and go to places where their customers are and just talk to them face to face, they can just get a ton of value, especially if they go to a show, they go to some kind of, whether it be an arts and crafts show, which those still exist. Finding out kind of what's working, what's not. I think going into actual fairs here, it can be really valuable. Real last question. I want to see if we can fit this one in from Todd. If we can fit this question in from Todd, can you start an online marketplace with no tech experience, but you have an amazing idea?
I believe that in 2024 you can. I think in maybe 2019, maybe not, but in 2024. Yeah, I mean, there's ShareTribe. There are other white label marketplace tech platforms. I don't know if you can really scale with them, but I think that they could be solid starting points for validating traction and getting early stage customers. And from that, then you can you might be able to utilize that to look at where is there a failure in their tech stack that you want to make an improvement to, and can you hire developers that are familiar with their platforms to work into it, or is there some reason why you want to actually move into having your own tech stack and your own marketplace, which you can do, but you're just adding a lot of cost and technical complexity to what you're first really trying to do, which is validate. Is there a market for this marketplace? Can you connect supply and demand? Is there something in which you have access to on the supply side that wants to be part of that marketplace? And is there, can you effectively find and sell to people on the demand side?
Awesome. So folks are asking if they can connect with you on Slack for any follow-up questions. And Scott, are you open to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn too. Happy to help anyone out that's in Oneday. And yeah, thanks for everyone for dropping and joining. Brian, thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and for your time today.
It was super fun. So I want to thank Samantha for putting this, being in the producer seat, putting this on.
Thanks,
really
man.
quickly. Questions that we had were for the quizzes, and I don't know if we really covered it, Scott. So this one might be a tricky one.
Oh, the last one we didn't cover, did we?
So correct one investment question. Choose one correct reason a C Corp superior to LLCs for obtaining multiple rounds of equity financing. For those that took a stab at it, the answer was number 2. C Corps have tradable and expandable shares versus membership units. We did not get into the weeds on that question, so you may or may not have gotten that one right. But let's see how you did for the second one. Early stage B2B customers are best accomplished by direct sales was the right answer there. So if anybody who got that one, that was covered in our conversation. I want to thank everybody for being with us. We look forward to the next show.